Today we're talking about how to surprise your reader, part 2. We're going to be talking about unreliable narrators and how they can be used to surprise your reader. And we're going to be talking about the moment of recognition for the reader. What you need to include to make sure that it's satisfying for the reader and that they don't just get really pissed off at you for having kept them in the dark about something or for having it be confusing. We're going to be talking about unreliable narrators in a very specific context, which is how you can use an unreliable narrator to facilitate a surprise in your story. When it comes to surprises, the reliability of your narrator is usually taken for granted for most of the story, only to be overturned at the end. Today's example is John le Carré's The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, and it's a terrific example, which Vera uses in her book at length. Before we get into it, we need to talk about free indirect discourse. Say what? Yeah. It sounds so much more complicated than it is. Free indirect discourse is how you use the character's viewpoint within third-person narration. So here are some examples. Here's your garden variety direct discourse. Had he thought about her at all? She wondered. Indirect discourse, we have the thoughts of a character coming to us indirectly via the narrator. She wondered whether he had thought about her at all. And then here's free indirect discourse, which is the character's own consciousness being placed into the narrative. Had he thought about her at all? It's not a direct quotation, but it's as if we have direct access to the character's thoughts. Usually, to make it more obvious that it is free indirect discourse and we're actually hearing from the character, an author will use aspects of the character's own idiom, such as oh no, oh my god, oh dear, or a swear word if your character is like that. Here's an example from Neil Gaiman's Good Omens, in which a demon needs to get to a location to try to stop the end of the world. Desperate times, desperate measures. He had maintained the Bentley without a scratch for 60 years. What the hell? He reversed suddenly, causing severe damage to the front of the red Renault 5 behind him and drove up onto the pavement. In this case, the omniscient narrator wouldn't say, what the hell? We're hearing directly from the character, but it's not a quotation. It's free indirect discourse. You can think of free indirect discourse as the way in which the character would narrate their own thoughts from a third-person perspective. Let's see how it was used in The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. Le Carré's novel weaves between direct discourse and free indirect discourse with Lemus, a British agent. Lemus gets an unusual assignment from Control. He's told by Control, we really must discredit Munt, who is a German agent. We ought to get rid of him if we can manage it. As agreed, Lemus descends into alcoholism and gets a job at a library. There he starts to develop feelings for a woman who is a member of the Communist Party. He assaults a grocer in order to get into jail. And once he gets out of jail, he is approached by a German agent. His primary contact is a German agent called Fiedler, who is intelligent and likable. Fiedler's superior is the aforementioned Munt, who is, I think by all accounts, a brute, a man without a conscience. Here are Lemus's thoughts, some of them in free indirect discourse, when he thinks he's figured out who the special interest is. Control had been phenomenally right. Fiedler was walking like a man led in his sleep, into the net which Control had spread for him. It was uncanny to observe the growing identity of interest between Fiedler and Control. It was as if they had agreed on the same plan, and Lemus had been dispatched to fulfill it. Perhaps that was the answer. Perhaps Fiedler was the special interest Control was fighting so desperately to preserve. He hoped to God it was true. It was possible, just possible in that case, that he would get home. Near the end of the book and the movie, Fiedler and Munt are arrested on the same day. Munt has also accused Fiedler of being the double agent, so they're both accusing each other. There's a court hearing at which Lemus and Fiedler present evidence that Munt is the double agent. Remember, Lemus believes that Fiedler is the real double agent and that he's protecting him from Munt. Then the woman that he has feelings for is called into the courtroom. She doesn't know why she's there. She was led there under some false pretense that the Communist Party wants to share ideas. So she's shocked to find herself in the courtroom and Lemus is there and she really doesn't know any better. She's questioned and it turns out that she has received financial assistance from an unknown source. In fact, the lease of her home was transferred to her name, meaning someone gave her the generous gift of home ownership. At this point, Lemus knows the jig is up. Clearly, his Secret Service has compensated the woman he had feelings for. He admits everything to the courtroom, hoping they'll let her go. He says that it was all a ruse, that it was all planned for him to spill secrets, and he says that Fiedler had nothing to do with it. He was not part of the plan. The trial is about to be concluded with everyone being under arrest, except for Munt, who will be cleared of all charges. Just before, Fiedler asks Munt how he knew about the financial assistance that Control gave to the woman. She wouldn't have told anyone. And Munt pauses for just a second too long, Lemus thought. He figures out what had happened. And he realizes what Control has done. Munt was the British double agent that Control wanted to protect. The brutish, repellent Munt. Fiedler was too close to learning the truth. It was Fiedler who needed to be discredited and executed. Lemus was set up by Control. He was considered dispensable. Now let's re-examine how it was handled in the text. Why the reader was led to assume that Fiedler had been the special interest. This sentence presupposes that there is a special interest Control wants to protect from Munt, and that the special interest and Munt are two separate people, not one and the same. But as Vera Tobin points out, when you introduce an idea in this way, it is more subtle and more treacherous because it's woven into the third-person narrative through free indirect discourse. So if you remember, the idea that Munt is the enemy has already been planted by Control. That was clearly wrong information that was intentionally given to us, the reader, as well as Lemus, the character. Now the author needed to introduce the idea that possibly, hopefully, Fiedler is the special interest agent. By using a presupposition and free indirect discourse, it's introduced in such a way that makes it much more likely for the reader to accept. And make note of this too. The usually stoic Lemus allows a note of desperation and hope, so allows quite a bit of emotion to come through in those few sentences. He hoped to God it was true. It was possible, just possible in that case, that he would get home. And this also works to deceive the reader. Gregory Curry says that when we have a sense of a narrator's mood, we quickly catch that mood ourselves. Framing in narrative works in part by a kind of imitation that is unlike the conscious mimesis of the actor and more a kind of mental contagion, something we as individuals know little about and have limited powers to control. By revealing Lemus's feelings, along with this misperception, the reader is much more likely to be aligned with Lemus and to share his same hope. And obviously, free indirect discourse is the perfect vehicle for this because you're sharing the character's emotions in the way in which they would speak directly to the reader, but it has more authority because it's not actually a direct quotation. It's more of their indirect thought embedded in the third person narration. Pretty sneaky, eh? So in your own work, think about using these three elements to slowly get your reader aligned with the perspective you want them to have. And those are presuppositions, which we covered in the first part of this series, and of course free and direct discourse, as well as sharing the emotions of the character. And this is important. When it comes to the moment of recognition for your reader, researchers have shown that it should have two components. One is insight, and the other one is acknowledgement. So let's break down insight first. Vera Tobin says, insight is when an understanding occurs to you all of a sudden. So it comes out of nowhere for the reader. And researchers further agree that insight includes 4 characteristic elements: suddenness, ease, certainty, and pleasure. So we've covered the suddenness. Let's get into ease. When you give the reader that moment of insight, that aha moment, it should be easy to understand, to grasp. It should feel intuitive. So if your moment of insight, that aha moment, is very complex, then it's likely it won't give the reader as much pleasure. If it's something that they really have to sort of figure out in order to, or untangle in order to have that insight, it should be like this. And if you think about all the examples we've discussed in part 1 and today's example, they all follow these elements. And the reason this is the case, researchers have shown, is that when the answer is grasped quickly, it increases people's belief that it's correct. So the harder it is to intuit, the less likely people are to believe that it's true, that they really got it. The third element is certainty, which is related to ease. So this is the feeling of confidence that the answer is correct. Now, it may be necessary to go back and reevaluate what happened in the story, given the insight that you now have, and that's fine. But the moment of insight shouldn't be marked by any tentativeness. There shouldn't be any uncertainty as to whether you really got the answer or not. So confidence needs to be there on the part of the reader. And then the last element is pleasure. And when the other 3 elements are there, suddenness, ease, and confidence, pleasure usually follows. Vera Tobin says displeasure is a sign that the other 3 have failed to materialize. And it's interesting to get into the research a little bit on this. Study participants who were given hints when they failed to solve riddles would get really angry and frustrated at the riddles. And that's sort of how a reader would react to a book if they feel like the answer or that moment of recognition is just out of reach, like they don't get it, but they know that they've had all these hints and yet it's not self-evident. And I think usually when authors are putting together a surprise for the first time, we tend to believe we've got to make it super duper tricky and add all these cogs and wheels and numbers and symbols and, want to make sure no one gets it before they're supposed to. And yet, the elements that need to be there when it comes to insight at that moment of recognition are the opposite of that. So, and if you really closely examine, as I mentioned, every example we've been through, they're really very simple surprises. It's just the way they're put into the text that make them deceptive. But at their core, they're all extremely simple. So keep that in mind when you're putting together your surprise. Now let's address the other side of recognition, which is acknowledgement. And this is much easier. The character must acknowledge the transformation from ignorance to knowledge. And what does that mean? Give your character a chance to experience the dramatic moment. Whether that looks like elation or horror, whatever it may be, give them that moment. Show it on the page because it helps the reader realize that the moment of recognition is here. This is what we've been waiting for, and we're on the same page with the character. Let's look at how it was done in The Usual Suspects. If you remember, The Usual Suspects had a really big moment of recognition. And here is that dramatized scene. Kujan drops his coffee in slow motion. This is, some may say it's overly dramatized, but this just serves to show you that you don't need to hold back when it comes to acknowledgement. The character has recognized something, they've acknowledged it, and you should show that. And now that we've seen that an important recognition is underway, the film can go on to reenact what actually happened to show what the realization was. Same in Le Carré's novel. At the end of the trial, Munt is asked a question, and he hesitates a second too long, thought Lemus. Then, a few sentences later, we read, and suddenly, with the terrible clarity of a man too long deceived, Lemus understood the whole ghastly trick. There it is. Moment of acknowledgement. Just like in The Usual Suspects, we can now go on to understand what it is that Lemus has grasped a couple of scenes later. Remember Aristotle's anagnorisis? Here's what Tobin has to say. In a classic moment of anagnorisis, not only is someone suddenly realizing an important truth, but the signs and experience of recognition are also being made explicit, so that the connection between evidence and conclusion is put front and center. And there we have it. The moment of recognition comprised of these two elements, insight and acknowledgement. I hope this video has provided some food for thought. I'm going to try to make a lot more of them because I have to be home anyway. So if you have any topics that you'd like me to address, share them in the comments below. Any ideas are welcome. My daring writers, I look forward to being in touch with the next video. See you.